chain around Elias Kade's wrists sparked as the current tried and failed to drop him. 40,000 voices had gone silent. Above him, the Thren champion. A 7-foot wall of chitin and muscle named Vorrak Sten stood over the human with a serrated blade pressed to his throat. The crowd had come to watch a slaughter. They'd gotten one right up until the moment it should have ended. Elias didn't struggle. He didn't beg. He looked past the blade, past the champion's mandibles, clicking in anticipation, straight into the box where the arena's master of contracts sat in his velvet robes. "Before you finish this," Elias said, his voice raw but steady, "I need you to answer something. For the record." Vorrak's blade didn't move, neither did his grip. "You mock me with words now?" the champion hissed. "Fitting. A human's last act. Noise. It's not for you." Elias's eyes stayed on the master of contracts. Alive or dead? Which one does the bounty require? The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was the sound of 40,000 beings realizing, all at once, that they had missed something. The master of contracts went pale beneath his blue-gray scales. He did not answer immediately. He didn't need to. The answer was already written into arena law, buried in a clause no one had read aloud in 300 years, and the human strapped to the execution frame somehow knew it by heart. 3 days earlier, nobody in the Kharn Vex Coliseum had known Elias Kade's name at all. He'd arrived in a prisoner transport meant for smugglers, not soldiers, a rattling freighter hold packed with debtors, poachers, and one exhausted human engineer who'd been arrested for the crime of repairing a ship the local governor wanted impounded. Nobody had asked what he actually did for a living. Nobody cared. Humans, in the outer provinces of the Thren Dominion, were classified somewhere between exotic labor and novelty pet. The arena master, a broad-shouldered Thren named Doran, hadn't even looked up from his ledger when Elias was shoved into the holding pens. Species? Human. Isk snorted, still writing. "Put him in the scrap fights. He won't last the week regardless." That single sentence would haunt Doran for the rest of his life. The other prisoners in the pen were exactly what the crowds expected. Grelak brawlers with bone-plated forearms, a pair of Ozomi smugglers built like armored toads, and a Thren deserter waiting to buy his freedom back in blood. They looked at Elias the way the entire Dominion looked at humans. An afterthought, wearing a face. "You'll die first," the deserter said, almost gently, like he was doing Elias a favor by warning him. "You people don't even have proper claws." Elias didn't answer. He was too busy counting the guards, timing the shift rotations, memorizing the layout of the drainage grates beneath the pens. He'd survived worse than an arena. He'd survived a war zone that cost him his unit, his rank, and most of what he used to believe about fairness. The Dominion didn't know what it had thrown into a cage, but no one, least of all Elias, expected what the arena's contracts actually said. The scrap fights were exactly as brutal as advertised. Elias won his first 3 matches, not through strength, which he didn't have against Thren or Grelak opponents, but through the kind of ugly, efficient improvisation that comes from a decade of battlefield engineering. He used chains as leverage. He used dust to blind. He used the arena's own drainage system to drown a Grelak's traction clause mid-fight. The crowd began to notice. Not with respect, with confusion, and then with cruelty. They started betting against him for sport, just to see how creatively he'd cheat death next. Doran noticed too. "You're not fighting like prey," he said, watching from the pen rail after Elias's 4th win. "You're fighting like you've read our rule book." "I have," Elias said. "All 400 pages. Isk laughed. A short, ugly bark. "Nobody reads the Kharn Vex Charter. It's ceremonial. Older than the Dominion itself. Then nobody noticed what's actually in it." Isk didn't like that answer. He didn't understand it yet, either. And that gap in understanding would matter more than he could imagine. That evening, The arena's ruling council convened for what should have been a routine administrative matter, promoting the human engineer to the championship bracket as a crowd-pleasing novelty. A joke bout against Vorrak Sten meant to end quickly and satisfy the audience's bloodlust before the real matches began. Nobody on that council read the fine print on what a championship bout, under Kharn Vex law, actually entitled the loser to claim. That oversight was about to become the biggest mistake in the arena's 300-year history. The morning of the championship bout, Elias was given 10 minutes with the arena's official record keeper, a nervous Ozomi clerk named Fennec, who'd drawn the short assignment of documenting the human's inevitable death. "Any last requests?" Fennec asked, more out of policy than compassion. "Yes," Elias said. "I want a full copy of the Kharn Vex founding charter, not the summary, the original text." Fennec blinked his second set of eyelids. "That's an unusual request from a man about to die. Humor me." What Fennec didn't know, what almost no one in the Dominion knew, was that the Kharn Vex Coliseum had been founded not as an entertainment venue, but as a war crimes tribunal disguised as a blood sport, built by a long-dead Thren emperor who distrusted his own generals and needed a way to settle disputes without triggering open civil war. Buried in that charter was a single ancient clause. Any combatant who defeated the reigning champion in a sanctioned bout could demand judgment on the terms of the champion's original crime, the crime the Emperor's arena had been built to punish in the first place. Vorrak Sten wasn't just a champion. He was the great-grandson of the general the arena had been built to try, and the debt his bloodline owed had never actually been paid. It had only ever been fought over. Elias read all 400 pages twice before the bout began. He wasn't planning to survive the fight by being stronger. He was planning to survive it by knowing exactly what winning, or losing in the right way, would actually mean. The bout began exactly as the crowd expected. Vorrak Sten was fast, brutal, and utterly without mercy, driving Elias back across the sand within the first 30 seconds. A backhand strike cracked 2 of Elias's ribs. A follow-up slash opened his shoulder to the bone. The crowd roared with the particular glee reserved for watching an underdog get exactly what they'd predicted. Elias let himself get driven toward the execution frame at the arena's edge. The ceremonial restraint, used only for the final blow in championship matches, unused in decades because no challenger had lasted long enough to reach it. It wasn't retreat. It was navigation. By the time Vorrak had him chained and the blade at his throat, exactly where the tradition demanded, a killing stroke be delivered before the assembled council, Elias had gotten precisely where he needed to be. That was when he asked his question. Alive or dead? "Which one does the bounty require?" The master of contracts finally spoke, his voice thin with dread. The charter states the challenger must be presented to the tribunal. Alive. Then Vorrak just violated Kharn Vex law by attempting to kill me here, on this frame, without tribunal present. Elias's eyes didn't leave the champion's, which means, under the very charter his bloodline was built to answer to, this bout is void, and his family's original debt comes due. Today, in front of everyone. The silence that followed wasn't confusion anymore. It was horror. Vorrak Sten's blade trembled, not from exertion, but from the sudden, sick understanding that the human chained beneath him hadn't been fighting for his life at all. He'd been fighting for the right to ask this exact question, in this exact place, in front of the one audience that could never unhear the answer. The champion had made a terrible mistake 300 years before he was even born, and he'd inherited it without ever choosing to. What happened next wasn't a killing, it was a reckoning. The council had no choice but to honor the charter their own emperor had written, the same law they'd ignored for centuries because no one had ever survived long enough, or read closely enough, to invoke it. Vorrak Sten's bloodline debt was read aloud for the first time in 3 centuries. Crimes committed against a conquered species during the Dominion's founding wars, crimes the Empire had buried under generations of ceremony and forgotten paperwork. Vorrak didn't fight the ruling. He knelt in the sand, blade lowered, and for the first time in his life looked less like a champion and more like a man finally set down a weight he never knew he'd been carrying. "You could have just killed me," he said quietly, so only Elias could hear. "Why give me this instead?" Elias, still chained, still bleeding, looked at him without triumph. "Because dead men can't make it right. Only living ones can." The Dominion's records would later call it the Kharn Vex Reckoning, the day a human prisoner, dismissed as scrap fight fodder, brought 300 years of buried injustice into the light with a single, carefully chosen question. Historians would argue for generations about whether Elias Kade had planned it, from the moment he asked for the charter, or discovered the truth only sand-soaked, hour by hour in the arena's holding pen. Elias never answered that question either way. He simply walked out of the Kharn Vex Coliseum on his own 2 feet, the first person in 3 centuries to leave that execution frame alive, and the only one who'd ever made an empire answer for it.